Start the CalibrateProjector program. Double-click the CalibrateProjector icon on the desktop. And then once you double-click that, a terminal window should pop up saying CalibrateProjector capturing 120 background frames. ... done. In the next part of this video, I'm going to go through the method we used to calibrate projector for the AR Sandbox. This is what the sandbox looks like before the CalibrateProjector program is started. The controls for this program are keys 2 and 1. 2 captures 120 background frames, and 1 captures tie point measurements. Now I will start the program. Once the program starts, it will automatically capture 120 background frames, which is the red being projected onto the sand surface in the first few seconds. But it does not always work perfectly. I'm going to recapture the background in just a second by pressing 2 on the keyboard. This is being done because the first automatic background capture does not always capture it correctly. And also this is a good time to check if there's anything around the sandbox before you make a capture, because it could interfere with calibration later on. Once this is done, you will see 2 white lines form a cross at one of the corners of the sandbox. And that's where you take your first tie point measurement. The yellow also represents anything that won't be captured during the tie point measurement. This calibration tool, also the green spot underneath it, is a representation of the calibration tool being projected onto the sand surface. It does not need to be lined up when taking a calibration measurement at all. Now we're going to go on to the next step, where I start taking the first measurement. Okay, I'm going to start by taking the first low measurement by digging out the sand close to the bottom of the sandbox, to be able to fit the calibration tool as low as possible. Every time a change is made to the sand surface, the background will need to be recaptured in order to continue. And that'll get rid of all the yellow interference and will allow us to take the first tie point measurement. You also want to make sure you don't go too deep into the sand. Make sure there's a little bit on the bottom. Could interfere later on. As well, we're going to recapture the background frames in a few seconds. Once that's finished, we can continue. And now I'm going to put my calibration tool at the first point here, at that white cross. I'm going to match up the white cross there and then on the black cross it's on the calibration tool itself. And you want to also hold this calibration tool as flat as possible. You don't want it to curve it and get as close as you can to the sand. You just want it to be flat. So try not to disturb the sand surface as you're going along. Alright, I'm going to take the first measurement. Once it's lined up, I press 1 on the keyboard. And once I press 1 on the keyboard, it should move to the next spot once it's measured that tie point. Okay, measured that one. Now I'm going to line it up again before I press 1. Now it's lined up, I'm going to press 1 and it should move to the next point again. And that green circle does not need to be lined up at all. It's just telling you that it recognizes as a calibration tool. And if that keeps going yellow and green, it could cause your calibration not to be recorded properly. And you might have to do the process all over again. Throughout this process, I do get that to happen once, but I get lucky and it works anyway. And I'll show you at the end of the video what it'll look like if you fails the calibration. Now after these 3 tie points, this is the 4th one. I'm going to take a high point now. This is at the other corner here. This should be as high as the sand should be possibly mounted up to there. Don't go too high, but don't go too low either. And now these are the middle 4 tie points. And that was the spot where it's blinking a little bit. I happened to get lucky on that one, but we want to try to avoid that as much as possible. And the ways to avoid that is just keep it a little further away from the sand, or take everything away and recapture the background again to get rid of some of that yellow interference in the background. That'll sometimes stop it as well. And in the middle there, you sometimes want to take low and high measurements as well, dig out the sand again and recapture the background, but you don't have to. It does help, but it's not really necessary if you want to just do a quick background calibration, or a quick calibration of the whole projector. I'll keep continuing on. Each time I do this, I am lining it up, but then I'm pressing 1. Now this corner, basically the closest corners you want to do opposites. So I took a low point at the closest corner nearby. I'm going to take a high point here this time. And it's 4 tie points for each section, so it is 3 sections, so there's 12 in total. Here I'm just doing another in between and making a little bit more level measurement. You can just take different varying heights and just trying to level it out a little bit, so I can get a little bit of variation in between the highs and the lows, which that's always good to do. I'm also preparing for the last spot, which is going to be a low point because it was a high point on the other side. When I get to that point, I won't have digging it out all the way, but once I get to that point, I just dig it out a little bit more in order to capture that tie point, and recapture the background first, then capture it. But when I get to it, I'll explain it a little bit better. I'm going to recapture the background again after disturbing the sand surface. This should be the last row. There should be probably 3 more left. Yeah. It helps to do this probably with 2 people, but if you're short for time and you're by yourself, you can do it just by holding the keyboard in the other hand. But it is easier if you have someone helping you out. And here I am. I didn't really dig it out well enough to get that last point, so I'm digging out a little bit more. And after I dig it out, I'll recapture the background. And you also want to make sure those low points aren't too deep. You want it to be just a little bit of sand at the bottom so you don't get the bottom of the box. And recapture the sand background with 2. There we go. And I'm going to capture this last point. And we are done. Now it's back to the original point where you started, and you should see a little red crosshairs on there following it around, and you should follow it pretty close to what you're doing there, and all the edges. I'm going around just to show you how well it'll follow it. Normally, if you don't do this well, it'll be way off to one of the edges, or it really won't be lined up very well. But it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but the better this is, the better your sandbox performance will be. And you also want to check it above those heights where you have it, and in between a little bit. And I'm going to basically I'm also going to show you what it's going to look like on the next screen in a second. What the terminal output will be for a successful calibration, or what it'll be for a non-successful calibration. In this part of the video, terminal 1 is in full screen, but the output should be exactly the same. If the calibration is done successfully, you'll see in the last 6 lines of the terminal output. It'll show you the values of the calibration that'll be used next time the AR Sandbox program is started. This window shows an unsuccessful calibration. It will say calibration error, and some tie points have negative projection weights. Please start from scratch. And this, you'll actually have to restart the program and restart over from the beginning. And usually, a lot of times what causes this is if you let that circle turn yellow and green randomly, or if you don't take enough variation in your measurements. Or if you don't actually capture your background enough times when you change the sand surface, it could cause issues as well. Alright, and that should conclude CalibrateProjector procedure that we have, and then we use that central. This gives us a good calibration